All right, so Jean used to be the Auditor General of Pennsylvania and ran for Congress, now is running for Attorney General. Welcome. Thanks for being here. All right, so we will start off with the same softball question for you, and I think it'll be an easy one. Yeah, you can hold it. You're a Pittsburgh guy.
Yes.
What is your favorite thing about Pittsburgh?
Well, I mean, the Pirates for when it's whether they're good or bad. PNC Park Pirates, that's the thing about Pittsburgh, but one of these decades we're actually going to be competitive.
It's never good when you're measuring it in decades. But yeah, there you go. Beautiful park. Well, thank you for being here. Do you guys want to kick it off?
All right, fabulous. Okay, James and I are going to be your HR interviewers tonight. We're taking the metaphor of the ultimate job interview very seriously. Here you have your hiring public. Thank you for being here tonight. And I'm going to kick it off with a question about why this job, why right now in your career trajectory, why this growth opportunity?
So I was, and I joke and say this, but there's an element of truth that I was living my best life. I was out of public life for the first time in 14 years. I was making money in my private law practice, teaching at Pitt, doing a night law class at Widener, and was able to travel, do that stuff that I had not been able to do. And then I started thinking 2024 is going to be such a critical election for the future of this country that we all had to do our part. And this is something I could do. I could run and I could be the Attorney General. And like the Philadelphia Inquirer said when they endorsed me in the primary, particularly in these partisan polarized times, we need an Attorney General who's not a partisan warrior. And I believe my track record in public life has shown that with his, first of all, my running a complicated state agency, my investigation found 3,000 untested rape kits, now having the legislature today, in bipartisan fashion, pass a law making sure that that never happens again. My investigation found 58,000 unanswered phone calls to the child abuse hotline, cracking down on school districts were waste, whether it was a Republican-controlled school district or Democratic, rooting out corruption, and look, I was tough and fair on a Republican governor and tough and fair on a Democratic governor, and I think those are the traits. Look, it's eventually going to be up to them and up to the voters, but I believe having already run a complicated state agency, running tough statewide investigations, and a record of holding bad actors accountable no matter who they are, particularly in these partisan polarized times, is exactly what Pennsylvania needs as Attorney General.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eugene. Pleasure to meet you. I'm James. Let's just fast forward past the election and imagine that you won the race, like you're the winner. What's your onboarding plan for your new role, and how are you prioritizing your work in the first 30, 60, and 90 days?
So for starters, you've got to immediately hit the ground running with a transition. You've got to be ready. Maybe you sleep in the next morning, maybe, and that's a maybe. But it is a 1,000 person agency, over $150 million budget, and you've got to be prepared on day one. What likely would be the first order of business is, and regardless of who wins the election, there will be election lawsuits. You've got to be prepared to defend the state and prepared to defend the voters, to make sure whoever the voters wanted to win Pennsylvania is the one that has the court decisions go their way. So that would literally be job one, and that onboarding starts literally right after the election, making sure you have the key staff in place and making sure that I'm fully briefed by the incumbent Attorney General on where we exactly are with those lawsuits I'm writing on day one. And then from there, it's really the top three priorities. It's community safety, it's consumer protection, and reproductive freedom. On community safety, establishing working relationships with all DAs across the state, all chiefs of police across the state, and mayors across the state. That's number one. Number two, on the consumer side of it, I'm going to look to immediately launch investigations, particularly into prescription drug prices. And I have some avenues that I'm going to look to there, and partner with other state AGs on these crooks that are trying to scam our seniors every single day. And the third one is reproductive freedom. I've talked about this before. We had an ectopic pregnancy at week 10. That procedure is now illegal in 5 states. So no matter what happens, I'm going to make it clear to the women of the United States that if they need that procedure from one of the states that it's illegal, then they can come to Pennsylvania and have their rights protected. Those would literally be what I'd be doing right out of the chute.
Sounds good, sounds good. I want to pass it back over to my colleague, Christine.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit about how you manage talent in the office of the AG, thinking about the next generation of people who might want to compete for the job you're competing for. What community groups are you a part of to broaden the talent pipeline for Pennsylvania's future AG?
So whether it's some of the neighborhood groups across Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, whether it's organized labor, whether it's the criminal defense bar, and yes, people that have worked in U.S. attorneys' offices and have been in DA's offices, I've been networking with all of those across state. Look, my first goal is to win the election, but there is a talent pool that comes with that I would immediately work to tap into. And my management style really is, there's sort of 3 tiers to this. Number 1 is, you gotta make sure your inner circle are people that share your vision, but have different ways of getting there. You know, I've had this rule in the offices that I've run before, which is when the door is closed before a decision is made, we can fight and kick and scream, do what we gotta do. I wanna hear different points of view. I want people to push me. If I have a perspective, I wanna be pushed. But once we make that decision, whether it's something I advocated for or someone else, once I say, okay, that's what we're doing, that's what the decision, we're gonna go out there and fight like the Dickens to try to get. So getting that inner core. Then in the portions of the department where they're gonna have retirements, we've gotta make sure that we have a streamline of how we can go out and get the talent to fill those key spots, whether it's former U.S. attorney offices, former district attorney staff, or people that are in the private sector that want to, even if they're making more money in the private sector, want that challenge, they want to buy into that. So you've got to do that as well. And third, you've got to make sure that it reflects what looks like Pennsylvania. I believe in not only diversity of opinion, but also it's got to look like Pennsylvania. I want a staff that is diverse in color, in orientation, and gender. I've always had a female chief of staff. I bumped up by 33% the number of people of color that were bureau directors when I was Auditor General, and when I was in the State House, I was the first York County legislator that had a bilingual district office. Now that is much more common today. That's the type of thing I also want to make sure we're doing, is I want to make sure we have diversity of thought and diversity of backgrounds and diversity of how people look and are.
Thank you for sharing. We have a number of questions on leadership and values that we might jump to up to you if you want to stick with workplace or...
Yeah, no, leadership and values. You had mentioned before the issue of abortion, which I think has been on a lot of voters' minds this election season. And I think that kind of dovetails nicely with one of the questions that we're asking tonight, which is just that, you know, the Attorney General interprets existing law, but A, it's a political position, and B, interpreting law, sometimes there's not one interpretation. So I do want to ask about your approach to that. You know, what's your interpretation where you would be trying to protect the right to life in Pennsylvania, protecting the right to having an abortion in Pennsylvania, good Lord. And, you know, tell me a little bit about that. How do you think about those things?
I've made it clear, and I'm doing this on the campaign so the voters are fully aware. I've made it clear that I'll never prosecute a woman for having an abortion, no matter what happens with Project 2025, hopefully it doesn't happen. Whether there's some effort to change the law in Pennsylvania, I'll never prosecute a woman for having an abortion or a doctor that performed for us. And I'm making sure that the voters know that going in that if you want an Attorney General that's going to do that, you're going to need a different one because it's not going to be me. One area that specifically relates to interpretation, because you know where the comma is can matter. And that is when you're talking about, particularly on the word emergency that exists in Medicare law. When it comes to a later term abortion, I'm going to make it clear that if the doctor and the woman view it as necessary to save the life of the mother, that is something that I do not want to get this between the decision of the woman and the doctor. So I will err on the side of the medical decision there as opposed to what the political reality might be.
And to be clear too, so abortion is legal
Yeah,
in
right.
Pennsylvania. So we're talking about a scenario in which, for instance, maybe the legislature decided to restrict it.
That's right, because you have a one-vote Democratic House right now, and there are legislators that want to pass a constitutional amendment banning it in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I mean,
So-
yeah, sorry, just to go one step deeper on that, have you ever had to enforce a law that you didn't agree with personally?
Oh, there were times where, particularly as Auditor General, there were things that, look, because that's what, you know, I want to be clear about this. There are the vast majority of times, particularly I've made it clear on capital punishment, where I have deep concerns about capital punishment. But at the end of the day, there are laws where it is required, and my team would be forced to do that. But when it comes to prosecutorial discretion, I've made it clear on abortion, that's where I will exercise it.
Thank you.
So let me ask you this, Eugene. Walk us through an issue where you've tried to shape the public will.
When I've tried to shape the public will, look, when I was a legislator, it took 5 years, but to me, distracted driving was a huge problem. And I started out as a backbenching legislator, and I proposed a bill banning texting while driving, and no one took it seriously, meaning inside Harrisburg. And it took me a 5-year campaign, but eventually we got a bill passed banning texting while driving. That was one where I traveled all over the state, meeting with editorial boards, showing the data what distracted driving did to the safety of Pennsylvanians on the road, and even to pedestrians crossing the street. So that was an area where I certainly went out trying to shape public opinion.
I got one more question for you. What missed opportunities in your public career still haunt you?
Missed opportunities. I still, it really bothers me that we didn't get charter school reform done when I was Auditor General. And so I advocate, by the way, there are good charters, there are bad, just like there's good traditional public and bad. But I thought Pennsylvania's charter school law, not the charter schools, but the charter school law was the worst in the country. It rewarded bad actors and punished good actors. And I know legislators agree with me, but I just didn't do enough to get it done, and that still bothers me.
What would you have done as Auditor General to try to get that done?
You know, it's a great question. The first answer is just work harder. Because we had so many legislators that told me behind the scenes, Republican and Democrat, that they knew I was right. Charter school operators that knew I was right. I could have made it more of a focus. So yeah, if the question is, would I have just gone around and start banging heads? No, but I think I could have done more on editorial boards. I think I could have done more on podcasts. I think I could have made the case more in TV interviews, because it is negatively impacting. The current Pennsylvania charter school law is negatively impacting charter schools, the good ones, and traditional public school. That's something that, it still bothers me that I didn't get that done.
I do actually we're jumping around a little bit, but back to, your approach to the job, your history. We've talked a little bit about your various positions you've had over the years. One thing you haven't done is really be a prosecutor, and that would be a big thing. That's a big part of being the Attorney General. Does that affect how you approach the job? How would you take on that role?
Yeah, for starters, my experience is very similar to the now former Attorney General, now Governor Josh Shapiro, is that we have very similar backgrounds, whether it's on the Judiciary Committee, where he was running Montgomery County, and obviously I was the Auditor General. Look, just like whether you're an expert in everything or not, when you are running an agency that large, you've got to have good people around you, even in the areas whether you're an expert in the area or not. So to me, it's developing the right people around you, and then I am selecting the priorities, focusing in on the consumer protection, how to protect the public, and then you get your feedback from staff on some of the best ways to go about that. That's when I was Auditor General. One of the things we did is I went out and got a Republican who was also very good at running the Bureau of Audits. And we had a great relationship. He had private sector experience, and that was something that I brought in. I think he helped transform the agency and how we went about it. For when I came in as Auditor General, some of these audits would take 2 to 3 years to finish. We were turning them over in like 5 to 6 months because we transformed how the office went. I'm not, without having a transition, I don't know if we can do the exact same thing in the Attorney General's office. But to me, it's not just about winning these battles legally, but also making sure the office is running as well as possible, that I, as the Attorney General, are getting the necessary information I need, and also making sure that we have a way that decisions I make and the decisions the department make, that decision filters out as efficiently as possible to the staff.
We talked a little bit about running an office, a team of more than 1,000 people in our last session with Dave, and specifically around just the mental health crisis that's happening with not only constituents across the Commonwealth, but with a work that's so challenging like what the Office of the Attorney General does. How would you care for the well-being of your employees and that of yourself?
Yeah, first, I'm going to care more about the staff than me. That's just, and I'll care more about the public than me. That's just the reality. When it comes to the staff, I've always been, if somebody says, hey, I need a break, whatever that is, they're going to get it. When I was Auditor General, even when the decision-making public sector union is not mandatory, I sent a letter to all the staff saying I prefer you stay in the union, even if that would be better for me as a manager, but I thought it was better for staff, healthcare benefits, mental health, all those reasons, pension, etc., for them to stay in the union. Not meaning the Union of the United States, but asked me in the department. And when it comes to the public at large, and this includes the staff, when I was Auditor General and following the horrific shooting at Stoneman Douglas, Governor Wolf and I led the school safety task force. And I went to every single corner of the state, meeting with schools and particularly students in those schools. It did not matter if we were in red America, blue America, or purple. They had different views on guns, I'm going to admit. They had different views on climate change. Every single kid in those school districts, every single one said they need more mental health help. Every single kid. So as Attorney General, I have to take that as an important factor that if we truly want to reduce crime, I think we've got to be better at education, we've got to be better at mental health, and certainly when people harm other humans, we have to punish them to the fullest extent of the law. But I'd rather work to prevent crime on the front end that will reduce what we have to do on the back end. And I believe mental health and better education are the two ways to get there. And as far as me, I'll just keep working out.
I like that. So I do have an economics question for you, Eugene. What opportunities do you see to strengthen PA's economic prospects by making sure all businesses are competing on a level playing field?
A couple of things. I think at the corporate and mid-sized business level, I think you could have tax reform where you would get rid of some of the tax loopholes, but also then lower the corporate net income tax rate. Again, that's a policy, but I think that would help make sure it's fair and level across the board and make sure everyone's paying their fair share, but lower the rate, which I think would make Pennsylvania more competitive. I think that would be a good thing. I think we need to raise the minimum wage. I think if you had more money in the pockets of middle income and working families in Pennsylvania, I think that would benefit small businesses as well. So I think those two things, just from a policy standpoint, would go a long way towards helping middle-class families and the businesses of Pennsylvania.
Thank you for that.
You've been in politics for a while, and I do want to know, has there been a time in your career where you feel like you've burned political capital to get an issue done?
The first time I really thought that way was my first day as a legislator, when I became the first legislator to put my expenses online. As my joke goes, I made 13 million people happy, slightly, and 202 people mad, meaning the House of Representatives. I learned a lesson that way, both good and bad. The good was that, eventually people just move on, but I could have gone about that better. I could have given colleagues a heads up. I could have gone out to and said, look, I'm going to do this. I made a commitment. But before you see this in the editorial pages that I'm, doing this great thing, I just want to let you know so you're not blindsided by this. You can do both. You can do what you believe is right, even if it's going to make your colleagues unhappy, and at the same token, do it in a respectful way that they're not getting blindsided. That was something I learned literally from day one. So I'd like to think I've gotten better since then. Certainly when it came to political capital, I could have done more on the charter school stuff. Again, could have done more. I do know that the work we did on the rape kits, I think was, I put a lot of political capital into that, and if that ended up burning political capital, so be it. The result was worth it. We got rapists off the street. We got a new law as of today, and we're never going to go back on having those untested rape kits again.
Yeah, just to clarify on that for anybody who's not familiar, so when you were Auditor General, there was a pretty significant backlog of
it's over
untested
3,000.
rape kits. Yep. And you cut that down by, the office issued an audit, and after that audit, it was cut down by how much?
Yeah, we reduced the backlog by 97%, and so the survivor/victim has to assent to the test. And there were a handful of instances where they chose not to, and so that's why it didn't get to 100%. You certainly have to respect that decision. So every now and then, but I'll never forget. There was a couple about a year ago now, and I was at one of these political events, and there was just I don't want to give the guy's name, but he comes up and he said, "You're the only Democrat I'm going to vote for." Of course, I wasn't the nominee yet, so there was no guarantee he was going to have that opportunity. And he just said, "My daughter was one of those rape kits."
And just to stay with the political capital question, I asked you if you burned any at any point. Is there a time you can think of when you decided not to burn political capital when you could have?
For good or for bad, and people that have covered me before, you probably look and say, "Oh, he's doing it again." I err on the side of pushing the envelope as opposed to tapping the brakes. So I don't remember any time that I said, oh, I'm not gonna go there because of politics. I maybe have gotten better at phrasing things as I am now a couple years older, but I don't remember a specific time where I said, I'm not gonna go there because of politics. I actually believe that if you keep doing what you believe is right, of course, within the framework of the law and the duties of the office, I think the politics works itself out over the long run.
So I know the near-term priority is winning the office of AG, but long-term, where are you in your career journey? Like, what's next after that? What's in the horizon beyond?
I keep saying this and people keep laughing, so I'm gonna take it that they think it's funny, but you know, if the Pirates need a center fielder 8 years after I'm Attorney General, I will certainly be willing. Now, as somebody that played Division III baseball when I was 21, I will recognize that the chances of that are slightly close to zero. So beyond that, look, if I win Attorney General and I get to do that job for 4 or 8 years, it will be a tremendous opportunity, and hopefully people will look back on that and say, I was one of the best Attorney Generals this country's ever had, and the people of Pennsylvania are better off for having served. What happens at the age of, what would be around 60 years old after that? God only knows, but hopefully I'm still doing Ironman races.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
I think we have time for maybe one more, and I want to kind of bring it back to the beginning, just talking about, you know, what a transition into office would look like for you. We have in Pennsylvania, it's the only rural office where this is the case, but we've had Democratic attorneys general for a long time. Are there any big changes that you would make going into office? Anything that you think isn't happening now or needs to happen more, or should stop happening?
There's two areas in specific that I think need to be addressed. One is particularly on prescription drugs and pharmacy benefit managers. Those middle people between big pharma and your neighborhood pharmacists and some of the bigger retail agencies. I'm very concerned about how they are operating. That's an area where I'm immediately going to look to address.
You think they're breaking the law in some way?
I don't want to say that until we have a thorough investigation, but that is something that I would investigate immediately. Second, I'm very concerned about social media's impact on the mental health of our young people. And that is an area that I would look to immediately address as well. Again, don't want to say they're doing anything right or wrong, but those are two areas that I don't believe are being addressed that I would look to begin to address on day one.
All right, final questions from either of you?
So, I do have one final question. Name a time when you more or less failed forward.
Failed forward.
And I think by that means, yeah. How, what were you going to say?
Grew through a challenge.
So, sometimes I joke and say that, you know, my kids will laugh that all of life is a sports analogy, but, you know, we ended up winning a state championship football my senior year at Central Catholic, and I ended up playing in college and had a great experience. What most people aren't aware is I got cut as a freshman. And I think getting kicked in the teeth, not literally, but getting kicked in the teeth that way forced me to, because I tied Dan Marino's elementary school touchdown pass record. And I know that sounds ridiculous because our careers diverged pretty quickly afterwards. But I went into high school without knowing like how much better I had to get. Like, had no idea. And that forced me to get in the weight room, to start taking my film series, like doing all the stuff you have to do to get better. And I think it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, was getting cut, because it forced me to change my approach to getting ready both physically and mentally. Because maybe if you're 6'5" and 240 and you just wing the ball around the moon, you don't need to worry about that when you're a teenager. But I clearly did, and getting cut as a freshman made it so that I was still playing when I was a senior in college.
Yeah, it definitely shows some level of resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Good to hear.
All right. Well, I think that might do it for us today. Any final thoughts? No? All right. Gene,
Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
Wonderful.
having me. Really appreciate it. Thank you.